I want all these posts to be about some random guy's experience in a bar. And if I walk out and have a good story to tell, and like I said in a recent post, when I walk out, if there was a great interaction with the bartender or all the customers around me were all laughing and we're all having a great time, and whatever experience happened, it happened naturally, not because somebody thought I was going to talk about it.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Decoding Cocktails podcast. I'm your host, Chris LeBeau. At the ripe age of 38, I left my former career behind and joined the hospitality industry. Since then, I've been on a rapid journey of learning, meeting all sorts of great people, and this podcast is my chance to bring you along with me, whether I'm interviewing somebody that works in the industry, another enthusiast, or occasionally stepping back to share what I'm working on or my thoughts. I'm so glad you're here, and so with that aside, let's get into today's episode. Hey everybody, welcome back to that one cocktail podcast you love so much, and coincidentally today, we are not going to talk about cocktails or spirits. My guest today is Bill Moran. Bill does not work in the industry, but is the man behind the account St. Louis Taverns. And there'll be a link to that, but that's st.louis_taverns. Despite all my love for spirits, cocktails, and the whole business in general, I am honestly a fierce lover of the neighborhood bar. And I kind of use that term a little bit there too. Obviously, Bill has used the word taverns. But while the term dive is kind of broadly culturally accepted, sometimes I feel like it can be a little bit derogatory, and it's also just overused a little bit. But no matter what you like to call these bars, these are the types of places that have a fairly regular crowd, and clearly passers-by, visitors come and go. But it's a lot of the regulars that make this place what it is. And there is an article I'm going to link to on my Substack page, in addition to some other stuff. But getting back to that, the author Brad Thomas Parsons, in an article on dive bars that he wrote kind of as we were emerging, so to speak, from COVID-19, talked to the owner of a bar called Rudy's in New York, where I've coincidentally been, and he was talking about how these places so often really are institutional anchors of a neighborhood. And Rudy, or the guy who owns it, I forget his name offhand, said, if Rudy's got bought out by a Walgreens, he goes, I feel like, his opinion was that the neighborhood would just die in that way, in terms of it's going to lose a lot of its soul. And so even if you're not from St. Louis, I think that this is a great interview in terms of thinking about what is the role of these places, no matter what city you'll call from. And so you'll get to hear about Bill documenting this journey along with his wife, Andrea. And I do think that the word documenting is an important word to note, because you'll notice that neither of them appear in any of the photos. And as you heard Bill allude to that in the opening part, despite having some 5,300 followers. And, as he will say, while maybe a little bit presumptuous, he doesn't want, as somebody who loves these bars, he doesn't want to walk in, be some known person, and have that skew the experience. And a quick caveat, a lot of times I will send guests questions in advance just so they can feel more prepared. And with Bill having been to, at that time, 125 plus bars that he had documented, I wanted to give him time to kind of like brainstorm in advance. And somehow my attempt to share those questions failed. So he was kind of being asked on the spot for a lot of recall. And so there were certainly some moments when I successfully stumped him, which is, of course, regrettable. It is a really fun account. I think they do a very genuine job of documenting this. They've got so many places now, they're starting to put out these short little recommended lists. Bill's quick to say these are not his saying they're the best. It's X number of places you could go with respect to that category. He did throw out one recommendation, though, you'll hear later on. There's a newer, there's a neighborhood bar that was formerly called Sophie's Place, has recently been rejiggered as the Tavern at Clifton Heights. And when pressed on giving people a recommendation, he was like, yeah. He's like, I'd give that one a go. You can keep up with Bill and Andrea's journey at st.lewis_taverns. If you'd like to see a list of some of my favorite all-time neighborhood bars that I can recall visiting around the country, I've got that on my Substack page, decodingcocktails.substack.com, along with how neighborhood bars got integrated into my 40th birthday, and a link to that aforementioned article from Brad Thomas Parsons, which I think is just a beautiful testament to that. So enjoy this conversation with Bill. So Bill, for me, I was interested when I thought about where to start our conversation. I was interested, if there was a first bar you remember being a regular at, or kind of really feeling called to, feeling pulled to, and so obviously this could be a college days thing. This could be more of an adulthood, but I'm just curious if you remember a first bar that really spoke to you.
There was, if we go back to college, then yes, there were two actually. One was a bar called Johnny's Beanery. It's long closed. That was at Mizzou in Columbia, Missouri. And I don't know what it was about it. I knew the owner, so you walk in, you're immediately welcomed. That is a big deal. They had decent food. And but the other one was a tiny little dive bar on the edge of town called the Tiger Club. And we called it Club Tigre to make it sound fancy. And there was really no redeeming qualities of the place. It was cheap beer. It was all the people who didn't want to hang out in the college bars. And that's where my friends kind of congregated. So that was kind of we kind of became regulars there throughout college. It was kind of a fun place.
And perhaps in certain times, and maybe to many of the places you have visited today, part of what makes them novel or remarkable, whatever you want to say, is that there is so little that's truly special about them, that they are very themselves in a way.
Exactly.
In my college town, I went to school a little bit north of you, up in Truman, and one place I never met. I think it was a bar called the Full Moon, and so it was more on the outskirts of town. And I went to bars in college. Compared to a lot of people, I was hanging out more at friends' houses, but that was always one of those places. Now, when I think about the fact that I'm so drawn to places like very lots of dives and neighborhoods, it's one of those places I always remember. I'm sure it would have been underwhelmed, and yet it probably also would have felt very itself.
Exactly. Yes.
So we've kind of had our brief back and forth, and so at some point in time, you kind of like out milling about in bars, and it occurs to you that hey, like maybe I should kind of start a little Instagram documentation of this or whatever. Walk us through the train of thoughts that led to you to actually start this thing, because you're now you're over 100 bars in, right?
About 120ish, I'd guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So talk to us about what led you to decide to do this, and we'll kind of get into what you've learned over the time.
This, to give more detail than you're probably asking for, a friend of mine, or a couple of friends of mine, about probably 25 years ago, started what they called the 12 Tavern Tour. And at the time, we would go to 12 taverns in downtown, or 12 taverns in, it all had to be within city limits was the rule. And they were all real close to each other, some of them walkable even. And so we would go to 12 different bars. And so after, 15 years of this, we had crossed well over 100 different bars, and some of them we would revisit, like if they close and reopen as something else, it counted as a new bar. And so after a while, people would talk about how, oh, you've been there, and I couldn't remember it at all. I had no idea what they're talking about. And so then my wife and I, about 3 years ago or 2 years ago, we decided to start just going our goal was to go to downtown St. Louis or the city limits and visit a new restaurant and a new bar, and explore the city. And I use Google Maps, and so we'd be sitting at lunch, and I'd pull up Google Maps, look for bars near me, and one would come up on the screen. I go, oh, look at this, Jack Patrick's. I don't think I've ever been there. And so you click on it, and it says, you visited here 6 years ago. And so I was like, oh, man, it's funny. I don't remember it. And so we would drive there, and I'd look at it and go, oh, my gosh, I had no idea this is Jack Patrick's. So you go in, you hang out. And it was actually Jack Patrick's that started this whole thing. We were sitting there, and I was laughing about how, Google said I'd been here, and I couldn't remember it at all. And so I made a comment about how I should take pictures of the bar. And then my wife was like, well, what are you going to do with pictures? Store them on your computer? You're never going to look them up. And I was like, maybe I could start like a Google Docs type of thing and just like write the name of the bar and the address or something and kind of help me. And then, of course, you're looking at, a bar name. You're like, what was up with that one? I don't remember that one. So that night, a couple nights later, I had recently joined Instagram. I have a personal page for my photography, and I'm skipping through some of the different pages, and I had followed some St. Louis foodies. And I noticed that they're all sitting there talking about this dish at this restaurant. And it just hit me. And I went to Instagram and typed in St. Louis bars, St. Louis taverns, all this. And St. Louis bars, I think, was already taken. It wasn't being used. And St. Louis taverns came up and not used. So I immediately took it, and I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do, but I knew that if I could put pictures there, tell a little story of the place or my experience there that night, that it would be something that I could remember. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I was like, I bet my friends follow this, maybe a few random stragglers who are interested in bars. I bet maybe I get like 50 followers. This will be great. And if anything, I'll be able to go, oh yeah, and I'll look at pictures and remember I was there and what it was like and what happened. I had no idea that it would turn into this.
Right. And to that point, in a way, that Instagram, despite its huge commercialization, is also it's a new kind of photo book that you So I'm curious, going back to the 12 Tavern Tour, because I'm no stranger to long days and long nights. Was this 12 taverns denoting the 12 months, or is this 12 taverns in a day?
It was in a day.
Okay. Well, I can tell you why you don't remember some of the places. Not that I've certainly been on a tour or two like that in my life, but yeah. I've certainly, I remember at some point in time, the second or third time I went to the Cat's Meow, I was like, oh yeah, I've been here before.
Yes.
But it was at the end of quite the barn burner of a day right there. I don't know. I was also just thinking of some things that I'll seed, and if they come to mind, great. We can always come back to them. Because I can always think these things like, is there ever if you were to think of is there the strangest promotion or special you've ever come across in terms you're shocked at how cheap it is or weird it is? I guess I'm curious in terms of I can't believe they sell this for that much, or that they sell this in general.
No, nothing comes to mind right away. Now, my last post that I just did at the Vault, I was talking to the bartender, and we were talking about opening, I get to bars. I like to get to bars. My wife and I will go out for a bar and a restaurant. We go out during the day. We're usually home by dinner time. So a lot of these bars that open at 5 or 6, we're walking in at 5 or 6 and sit down. We're almost always the only people there. And we just got to talking to this bartender, and this bar actually opened about 4, and we didn't get into 5 o'clock. But he was talking about how cool it was when you're the first person in the bar, and he said we actually do this promotion called penny for a pint or a pint for a penny or something like that. And he said that if you walk in and order a bush beer, you can get it for a penny. And
yeah, shout out to the folks at Trust for their penny.
Trust,
So that to me is certainly one right there. So, while it's not always about me and my stories, so like what triggered the question for me, shout out to the Patch neighborhood way down south in St. Louis. I don't even know if this actual address is occupied at this point, but there used to be a bar down there, and this is 2009 or so, called the Patch Tavern. And so it's right on that little stretch of Ivory and Michigan, kind of right there. Okay. And so we're down there for a little bar crawl, not 12, like 3. We're not quite keeping up with those 12 tavern folks. But anyways, we walk in there, and it's a Thursday night. I actually know that. But anyways, this woman points us to what is called like the mystery bucket. And I mean, to be fair, let me paint a picture for you guys. It is a trash can with a lid. And there's a hole cut in the top of the lid, and you reach into this ice-filled trash can full of beer, and whatever beer you pull out, it's $1, unless you pull out a Stroh's, and then it was free. And so we definitely emptied that trash can that night. And
that's an awesome idea.
So it was certainly a fun one right there. But yeah, I think it's also just the other thing for me is it's amazing. And obviously, I say that laughingly, but I mean, to me, it's also like being a fan of these places that are so at times unapologetically themselves, if that's even the right way to put it. But I think it's interesting how in some of these places you can step into them and they can feel like you are stepping back in time, or you're like, oh my God, I didn't know that sold for that price anymore. So that's always interesting and comes to mind for those places.
There's a lot of places like that when you walk in, it doesn't matter when you walk. I guess there are, the light Friday nights and Saturday nights that fill up, but you walk in on most days and there's 3 or 4 people there, and it's like the same 3 or 4 people you saw last time you were there. And the first thought always crosses my mind is, I can't believe this place is still open. And, good for them for doing it. But yeah they're just unapologetically themselves. And
yeah, because I think the term, it's like, second place or whatever. But I think about that. And this was a question that came up with Steve, and so, it'd be interesting to talk through it with you. But yeah, for a lot of people, this is, and it doesn't mean that they're all sitting there drinking all the time, but this is, in a way, this is their second space. This is their home away from home where they go to commune. And so to that point, some of these places, it is miraculous to think like, how are they actually bankrolling this? But to some of them, they have this very entrenched following that's just there on the regular or whatnot.
Yeah.
So I'm curious on this, because knowing that you often go towards opening, this could help. But so, some crowds are more insular, protective, etc. We don't need to really get into names, but have you ever shown up to a place and been like, you know what, I don't know that we're welcome, or I shouldn't be here? Or have you ever been doing research and picked around a place? I guess I'm just curious if anything's ever kind of made you think otherwise at all.
No, you'll be surprised. You'll walk into a bar like that, and everybody looks over at you, and then they go back to talking again. And I don't know. I have a feeling if I was sitting there as the guy that was there every day, I'd do the same thing to somebody new that came in. And they're never unwelcoming so much. It's just that you're the new person, and so you feel, a little odd about it when you walk in. But I'll tell you what, 90% of the time you start talking to one of them and they're just so happy to have a new face there. The bartenders, pays extra attention to you because you're not Joe, Bob, or Bill. It's just a new face, and I end up having a lot of fun in those types of situations. Mm-hmm. Those guys, it's always a good time.
Yeah, I think, and that was, and referencing him earlier, make sure I didn't fully flush it out for everybody. So Steve Smith of the Royale, former guest. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Steve, which would have been my big thing. It's like, hey, maybe you don't want to show up for the first time at, midnight on a Friday, But other than that, show up, be respectful, and other than that, chances are pretty much everybody's going to be like, "Hey, we're glad you're here."
Exactly.
So, thanks for enjoying this place that we enjoy right here.
Yep.
Have you ever, because I have a story for this too, but have you ever bumped into a place where, like, whether or not like the term custom is happening, but like you've seen some weird bar game ritual? Can you think of and if you need a minute and nothing comes to mind, no big deal, but I'm trying to think. I think of a time that I was at Babe's Tavern, and maybe we talked about this, but for the sake of the recording, regardless, I walked in late at night. I hadn't been to 12 taverns, but I had probably been to 4, and all the chairs were pulled back from the bar, and they've got a fairly long bar right there at Babe's, at least one, and they are with empty beer bottles. They are playing shuffleboard with these empty beer bottles, and they're shooting them, and I was just like, well, this is ridiculous and awesome. Little feat of humanity to behold right here.
No, I have not seen anything like that. There is a bar game that I'm sure just about everybody's seen it, but there's always like a cup full of dice, and it's like, I guess there's some amount of money if you roll, I don't know, all 6s or something like that. And I can't tell you how many times I've sat there and watched people play it and cuss and yell about how they're so close and someday I'm going to get this, whatever. So that's the one I can think of that I've never actually played. I watch people play it and they get all irate because they didn't win again. And so, yeah, it's the one I can think of right now, but I'm sure I've got something.
Mm-hmm. Tell us about the places that, because beyond the St. Louis Taverns guy, you're also someone who kind of comes and goes to bars on his own. Like, so tell us about, the places you enjoy spending your time, and what is it about it? The people, the owners, the food, the drink. Tell us about the places where you keep being drawn back to.
Well, Jack Nolan's and Soulard's a good one. I go there quite a bit. Obviously their food's good. You can get their beers, their Busch beers, cheap, and they have I don't want to make it sound like a great whiskey selection, but they have a decent whiskey selection. And every once in a while he'll get something in that's hard to find, and it lasts for a day or two. But that's one of those places where the people are good, the bartenders are good, the crowds. I mean, it's a Soulard crowd, so it's always kind of that same crowd in every bar down there. But the regulars are always there. So you walk in and it takes you, you see a seat at the end of the bar. It takes you 5 minutes to get there because you stop and have to say hi to each person as you pass by. And so that's a good one. I also like, I'm going to struggle with a name right now, darn it. I don't go there enough, but Platypus is another one that's really good. I love a great cocktail. I'll sit down, have a cocktail, and then you go back to eat duckbill. And he has like 4 items on his menu, and I can never decide what I should get because they're all so delicious. So those are 2 that I can think of right off the top of my head.
So going back to Jack Nolan's, because this came up when we talked the first time. So do you remember, again, you've been on the tavern tour for a long time now. Was this a spot your friends recommended? You knew the owner, you still live in the neighborhood. How did Jack Nolan's slowly become your place?
I actually have a mutual friend with the owner, a guy that I know from my kids playing sports. We met up, through that. And I had read about Jack Nolan's because they were had great burgers, and they had only been open for a couple of months at this point. And my mutual friend posted on Instagram about how he went and visited his old college roommate and doing great things with cheeseburgers, and check it out, whatever. And so I was like, oh shoot, I should go down there. And I just walked in and with my wife, and we walked in and ordered a cheeseburger. It was delicious. It was a fun place. And Jim, the owner, was there. And as he was walking by, I just happened to be like, "Hey, you know Brett?" He's like, "Yeah, my old college roommate." And so we talked for a few minutes. He was in a hurry to go. He had to leave right away. But since then, he and I have become good acquaintances, good friends. And, it's just one of those things where my son works for his other restaurant, AJ's. And so he's helped he's helped me out for getting my kid a job, and he serves some great burgers, and both of his restaurants or both of his bars are doing well, are great places to go.
The internet could solve this for me in 2 seconds, but AJ's, I don't know if I know AJ's.
It is the old Jefferson's in Belleville on the west end. End of Belleville.
Okay. Yeah, that's outside of my typical my typical perimeter right there. So got it. Okay, that's helpful. I was like, why do I don't know everything, but I feel like I know a lot. In terms of the world where people should, and I feel like we certainly live in a world where at least people claim to like trying new things. But so, say people are kind of, listening to this and they're like, okay, like, hey, I should do this, And what you love or recommend here isn't necessarily what they're going to be like, oh, this is my favorite ever. But if someone has ever been like, okay, I'm feeling a little hesitant about, just walking into some random, tavern or whatever, are there a couple where you remember just, you talked about how often people are so happy you're there once you kind of come in, but are there a couple places you feel like are easy spots to land that people might not think of right off the top of their mind?
I just was at the tavern at Clifton Heights, and it was, I don't know. I remember when it was Sophie's. I think it was Sophie's place. And
that's what that. Okay, yeah. I remember you made that post, and I didn't know what that was. So it's right there on Watson, right there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and a friend of mine used to love it, and so we went there back then. And unfortunately, my friend's no longer with us, so we have kind of stopped going there. But I realized that this is a place I hadn't been, and when we pull up, I was like, "Oh man, this is the old Sophie's." And so we went in, and they've made it a little bit better, in my opinion. Sophie's used to have like plexiglass on the back side of the bar and on the game room side, and they've opened all that up, so now you can sit all the way around the bar, the back side and front side of the bar. And I don't know, it's got a patio out back. It's a small, basically big enough for you to stand and smoke, and there's like a table for the smokers out there. So it was a good easy spot. I felt like the crowd was there. There was a day of I think we had 3 games going on in St. Louis that day, so everybody's there in different jerseys, and there was a guy who had obviously been there for too long, and he was getting up to leave, and I even mentioned it in my post about how people get up to leave, and all the goodbyes and teasing and all that turns into 30 minutes onto the departure. Mm-hmm. And that was a true story. My wife and I were sitting there laughing because this guy was trying to leave, and everybody kept coming over and hugging him and making fun of him about whatever happened the week before. And so it was just kind of a fun crowd, and I'm sure half the people I saw there were regulars, so they're probably there right now.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So one, thank you for that clarification. Because I look at some of your posts. There are places I've definitely not been, but some of them like, oh yeah, been there. But so that's one I will need to check out. Is there, knowing that you and your wife often walk in early, is there ever a place you've walked into relatively early and you've been like, oh my God, this place is packed? So again, some of these are like obviously me really taxing your brain, but I'm always curious about the place where you're like, oh my God, yeah, this place has a crowd at 4.
That one will take me a minute to think of. I know there's been some, because we've even made jokes about the size of the crowd, but I won't remember a name right now.
Sure.
Unfortunately, there's so many right now.
So another one, yeah, and this is where to everybody listening out there, I had a share doc fail before this. So I sent Bill some, like, again, there's no right answers to any of these questions, because I was also interested in, like, if there's ever a bar you've really struggled to find that you were looking for. Google's obviously pretty good at getting us places, but like at times you're like, oh, like this is a bar? Like, yeah, some places just from the outside, you're like, no identifiable. Again, this doesn't need to be about, so something you said to me was when a post tends to be more of an a review, like an observation, like, oh yeah, here's where it is, a little bit, might indicate that it wasn't the best experience or whatever. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus right here, but like, is there anything that you experiences that were memorable because it was just totally underwhelming? And you don't need to like and say it however you will.
Yeah.
So.
No, there's a particular bar. A lot of the bars, once you cross River to Pear, they're all smoking, and it's hard to sit in a bar and when the place is hazy, but at the same time, if it's a cool bar like Mary's Blue Ribbon Lounge, we went in there. It's hazy and smoky, but man, the people were great. The owner was there. He had on a Cardinals jacket that he had basically covered in patches from all the World Series and all the championship games and everything, and he was a joy to talk to. And so I'm willing to tolerate smoke when it's a good time. But I went into a particular bar and it was smoky, and a guy at the bar it was probably noonish, and he was so drunk I thought he was going to start a fight with the guy next to him. And it's just one of those things where it could have been a cool bar. It was my one bad experience. And so I never did write about it because I couldn't even, like, sometimes I come up with a story about myself or something that happened in the past to kind of fill in some of the blanks. And I was like, I'm just going to put this one aside for a while, and maybe I'll revisit it some other time.
I will say, yeah, to your point of like the northern part of South County, I feel like there's a part of like town and country too. My parents, not too far from their house. Yeah, like I don't know what it is. Like in parts of like St. Louis County, I guess that there are provisions still. There's a little corner bar I went to near their house recently. I walked in, I was like, oh my God, they allow smoking in here.
Yep.
It is such a shock. And hey, like, I mean, who am I to sit here and to judge or whatever?
Exactly.
But it's more like you walk in and like, I can remember I was in that bar for about 9 minutes. I walked out, my clothes I was like, you know what, this is not fun.
Listen, I get it. If you're a bar owner, you should get to do what you want with your bar. It just so happens I prefer that you don't allow smoking.
Yeah, exactly.
If I get my way.
But yeah, like, I mean, hopefully, like people are either in or out at that point in time right there. What about, I know you said that you and your wife, when we were talking originally, like to kind of, jaunt out of town for like a hike or whatever, or things like that. And I know I've seen you post this, but like if people who are in St. Louis, since, not all of our listeners are, hello, everybody else out there. But if you find yourself like wanting to take a trip outside, the greater St. Louis area, is there a bar, somewhere that you remember bumping into in kind of more rural Missouri, rural Illinois? So this is where, again, he's like racking his brain.
I have a bar. I won't remember the name of it, but it is, if you go to, we hike Hahn State Park, and as you're driving down to Hahn State Park, on the right-hand side, there's a bar/restaurant that looks kind of log cabin-ish. And it's by no means is it a tavern or anything like that. It's more a restaurant. But we always stop in there and on the way back from our hike and have a beer and move along. And I don't know if it's just because it's the first place that has something, or if it's just now it's become kind of our thing. But that is one of those places that when you travel outside of the area, I like to go there.
At this point in time, because, the pandemic shifted a handful of things in general in the world. Do you have a thought on like what percentage of places you go that are cash only at this point in time?
I would guess maybe maybe 5 to 10%.
Okay. Yeah.
Just a lot of places will take credit card.
Yep.
Some places, of course, charge a few extra dollars for using a credit card. We're actually, I actually have a funny story that before, it's now called the Gallery Pub, but it used to be called Thurman's on Shaw.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And we walked in, and they've got great cocktails. They have all this, food and whatever. We walk in and sit down, and my wife orders a cocktail, and I order a Manhattan, and it's a beautiful day. We're gonna sit out in the patio, and I ask how much, and I hand her a credit card, and the guy's like, "We don't take credit cards," and I panic because I very rarely carry cash.
Sure.
My wife, when we go out, she doesn't even bring her purse or anything. And I was just like, I cannot pay you. I don't even have a debit card to go get cash. And the guy ended up, he's like, all right, so don't tell anybody this. And he went and got out some old credit. It wasn't like the zip back and forth thing, but it was, it obviously hadn't been used in a while.
Got it.
So he was able to charge my card. Man, I felt so bad.
Yeah, I do feel like you probably should make attempts to be overt about it.
Yeah.
Because just so few people carry cash anymore. So at this point in time, 100 bars in, I'm sure we have plenty in the greater St. Louis area. Do you feel like are you struggling at all to like find the next place at all? I'm curious, like with your following, or people like, hey, you should come down to whatever, or how is the sourcing going 100 plus bars in at this point?
I'm actually starting. I actually get a little worried sometimes. I read about new bars opening up, like that Little Lager. I can't wait for them to open up because it's a new bar. There's a couple of places that, when I first started, I was making a post and I had like 30 followers or whatever. And I'm like, maybe I should go back and do some of these bars that I first did. There's a lot of people who send me a message like, oh, you should check out the Mac.
And already been?
Yeah, I was there 6 months ago or whatever. And so I know that most people aren't always scrolling back and looking at it. So I might be able to get away with some of those earlier ones as a redo. But man, there's a lot of scanning Google Maps and trying to find anything.
Mm-hmm. I saw that I think you recently, mentioning Jack Nolan's had your like top 5 cheeseburgers or whatever. Question: I was curious in terms of more of those compilation posts. Are there other categories you've thought about that way? Best beer selection, or so what are the other things that do exist that I've missed or might be coming one day?
Well, first of all, let me clarify that I'm not doing like 5 best. This is more a category of I would like to get a cheeseburger. Well, here's 5 bars that offer a great cheeseburger.
Got it.
I wanted to do, like, all of these are 5 bars for something. So somebody did comment about, I can't remember the name of the restaurant, but it wasn't it's not a bar. And so I just kind of wanted to highlight bars that have these, whatever these topics are. I do have I think I have a pretty good category for next month. I'm not gonna say anything because it's so unique. But that one, I'm looking forward to my one that I will be doing on May 5th. But other ideas are the ones, of course there's going to be, like we talked about, doing 5 bars and their best cocktail, or 5 bars for a great happy hour. We're trying to do things. Every year, all the local magazines post bars, patio bars and patio restaurants and rooftop bars and all that. And if I run out of ideas, I may do something like that. But I'm trying to do things that just haven't been done. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the direction I'm going.
What about, and again, some of this I know is you racking the brain, but, so Platypus, despite being a little bit more, it's not like super elegant or anything, they certainly boast and they're aiming for like a great cocktail program. Mm-hmm. Are there bars you've been to that were decidedly more middle or low end of the road where you were kind of surprised by their drinks program at all? Again, I'm asking you to scan 100 in your, but I'm curious. Yeah, sort of.
Well, a good one is, and maybe I'm not looking at it correctly, but when you walk into the Royale, it's got just that classic,
Yep.
tavernish look to it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's got a great patio, and so I guess when you walk in, you don't expect, as a first time person walking in, I guess you wouldn't expect there to be these cocktails that are amazing.
Yep.
I'm sure there's others right now.
The Royale is a great answer because, yeah, to me, it's more like I'm curious if there's a place where, now cocktails are so in vogue versus once upon a time, whether it was in New York, Toronto, or here, sometimes it was more, there is a bartender who happens to work in a couple of places and they know what they're doing.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, Steve, very much intentionally made it a point from early on, like we are going to really work to kind of hone our cocktail program.
Yeah.
But you're right. For the first timer, when they walk in, they would certainly not expect the Royale to present the way it does.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, if they walked in blind. Okay, yeah. I think it's more, the moment you remember being surprised by a place, or you turn around in a dive bar and you're like, I'll have a Busch beer, and they're like, that's $12.50, and you're like, what's going on? Is this Manhattan? What's going on here?
Yeah, there's another good one I think is with the whole idea of the campground patio and all that is the Golden Hoosier. Mm-hmm. When you walk in and there's all the mounts on the walls, and you go into the back and it feels like a Missouri State Park, out back. And but boy, they've got great cocktails too.
Yeah, no, I was at the Hoosier pretty recently, and they're doing real good work over there. So I feel like you kind of have a nice posting regularly, but are there other things regarding, I don't know, what you've learned along the way or are looking forward to that we haven't talked about yet? I don't want.
No, I'm like this last post. I happened to stumble on some. I was actually on the website, and it was just the history of the building, and I was like, well, this is perfect. I mean, just recap this and then go right into the description of the bar. And my next, I'm torn on who I'm gonna do next. I have two bars. I stumbled on two good ones, and I didn't stumble on them, but I came across two good ones, and I'm torn on what I'm gonna do next. But one of them is another great history story, so I'm kind of leaning towards that one right now. So that'll be my Saturday morning post. I think I'm probably gonna do the Hi-Hat in Soulard, and it's just got a great backstory. It's the building that Hilary Clements lived in, who is the guy that he and four of his friends got together and decided on some cold winter day they wanted to go have a party and walk up to a tiny little pub on the corner called McGurk's, and they walked up there, got thrown out, and came back home, and here we are, 40-ish years later, and it's turned into the biggest party in St. Louis. So
yeah,
Soulard Mardi Gras. So
yeah, huh? I don't know if I've been to. So it's called Hi-Hats.
Yeah, it just opened. I would say within a month.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. It's the old Johnny's.
Okay,
it was
yeah,
for a very brief period of time.
Yep, right there on Russell.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, this is a lot of insider baseball to those people who aren't from the area. But okay, got it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the number of bars is just it is stupefying to keep up with. Bill, anybody out there that wants to follow along, we'll obviously have it in our show notes. But so run us down on how we spell that the Instagram handle out here, so we can make sure that everybody gives you a good follow right here.
It is st.lewis_taverns.
Perfect. It's funny. I don't know, who can keep up with social media in terms of how you bump into people. But I remember for a while, because you get there so early, it felt like some very which I think is what you designed it to be. You're not in the photos and whatever. It felt like this very interesting documentarian look at places. And so it didn't strike me as like, it struck me as more like an institutional look at St. Louis's bars. And so there is a man behind the camera, but as Bill was saying to me, it's like he likes to keep a pretty low profile. So give him a follow, and you can kind of keep up with what's going on out there in our scene.
That was actually done intentionally. There was a time where people were following me that were friends, and I wanted to see if they'd ever figure out it was me. And I would be at a bar, and my wife would be talking to a friend of ours for several years, and they were like, "What did you do today?" And Andrew's like, "Oh, we went out and visited a couple of bars for Bill's Instagram page." And they're like, "Oh, what's his page?" And she'd tell them that. They're like, I love that page. I follow that, all my friends. So yeah, it's so I do it on purpose. One, I don't know if it'll ever be big enough for this to happen, but one, I don't want to walk into a bar and have somebody like a bartender or owner or whatever recognize me. I know that's pretty presumptuous, but it's something that I want all these posts to be about some random guy's experience in a bar. Mm-hmm. And if I walk out and have a good story to tell, and like I said in a recent post, when I walk out, if there was a great interaction with the bartender or the all the customers around me were all laughing and we're all having a great time, and whatever experience happened, it happened naturally, not because somebody thought I was going to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, Bill was very quick to say, hey, that, any bar can be any given Sunday. You could walk in on just bartenders having a bad day, bars empty, whatever. But if you're looking for at least his take on it beyond the photos, which are always done, so it's good to know about your photography interest. It sounded like what he said was when you're reading the actual caption, if it was not necessarily the most memorable thing, then you might get a pretty quick rundown on the establishment, versus when you tend to see more documentation of interaction, was at least seems to see the idea, at least for his experience, was a more colorful and memorable one.
Yeah. Yes.
Got it.
And I should point out that I do have a photography background. My wife would probably yell at me, but she does probably 90% of those pictures. I have this fear of taking pictures in settings like that. I don't know what it is. It's just one of those.
Me too.
So when I'm, especially when you're in a small tavern and it's all local or regulars hanging out, last thing I want to do is be seen taking pictures. And so I try and be as discreet as I can if I'm by myself or whatever. But my wife, she just gets up and
fearless. Well, that's great to hear. Bill, thanks for taking some time after work today to chat. This has been great. I really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. It was a good time. Thank you.
You bet. Hey, everybody. Thanks for listening. The show notes for today's episode are available at decodingcocktails.com/podcast. If you'd like to keep up with what we're working on, there are two great ways to do so. One, our short weekly newsletter, Cocktail Confidential, which you can sign up for at decodingcocktails.com/newsletter, or give us a follow on Instagram at Decoding Cocktails. If you think this podcast is great stuff, we'd love it if you'd subscribe or, of course, share an episode with a friend. The Decoding Cocktails podcast is produced by Chris Bay and myself. Thanks for listening. We'll see you again soon, and happy cocktailing.